Well, again, welcome one and all. Special welcome to those who maybe are back at Mass for the first time in a while, and certainly as always, welcome to those who are participating at home, and a special welcome to Liam and his family. Congratulations. We are very excited for you today, Liam. You know, in communist China, people aren't able to do what we're doing here today. For the most part, they're not able to openly practice their faith. You know, countless churches there have been taken over by the government or outright destroyed. When the rector of my seminary went to visit China in the early 1990s, he was told to leave his Roman collar behind because it wouldn't be wise or safe to be wearing that in public like we can do so openly here in the United States. Not long ago, I read a story about an elderly Chinese woman, a Catholic, who found her way here to the States a number of years ago. And when she came, she brought with her a Bible that had originally belonged to her grandmother. She said her grandma kept that Bible hidden from the authorities for almost 50 years. And during what China called the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, her grandma was certain that somehow that Bible was going to be found and that she and her whole family would be arrested and sent to a prison camp for having the scriptures in their possession. Her story reminded me of the monks of the Dark Ages in England who copied out the Gospels in secret because to be found out was to risk death. It was illegal to be Catholic in those days. Like those monks of old in Great Britain, the persecuted Christians of today in China and the Middle East and elsewhere around the world, they witness by their lives that Christ is risen from the dead. They are witnesses to the resurrection. Jesus said today in St. Luke's Gospel, "You are witnesses of these things." You are witnesses of these things. Not just the apostles, but us too, all believers. You know, just 3 weeks ago, this Paschal candle was lit at our Easter Vigil Mass, just like it was lit at all Masses in all Catholic churches all around the world that night. And the same message was proclaimed at that Mass in all those churches around the world. The message that Jesus Christ is risen. He is alive. And you are witnesses of these things. It's hard for us to imagine, I think, the fear of those first disciples in the days immediately following Jesus' death, though. They didn't feel like proclaiming that they were witnesses to anything because what they had witnessed with their own two eyes. They were filled with fear. In fact, they ran away from the cross. As the Gospels tell us, only a few women stayed behind to pray. Even Jesus' appearance to them today, as we heard in Luke's Gospel, initially frightens them. But they were startled and terrified, Luke says, and they thought that they were seeing a ghost. So to prove to his readers that this wasn't just some apparition that they were seeing, that Jesus wasn't a ghost, St. Luke goes on to write about Jesus eating with his followers. And Jesus says to them, "A ghost doesn't have flesh and bones, as you can see I have." Then he asks them for something to eat. I've always thought that that had to be kind of a humorous scene. We're told that the apostles were incredulous with joy. Their jaws are on the ground when they realize what's going on. And in the midst of that, Jesus says, "So, you have anything to eat here? Anything to eat?" They must have thought, "Do we have anything to eat? You just rose from the dead and you're talking about having a meal? Well, sure, here's some baked fish, Lord," right? But he asked that in order to show that he was risen in totality. It wasn't just his spirit, it wasn't just his soul that rose, but his body too. And after that encounter with our risen Lord, the apostles knew that they couldn't stay in hiding any longer. They couldn't stay in that upper room. They couldn't remain silent anymore. They knew that no matter what, they had to preach the good news of the resurrection. They had to share their joy with other people, even if it was going to lead to persecution for them, even if it would lead to arrest and to death. But they weren't afraid anymore. They were able to stand up to every opposition that came their way and to proclaim that Jesus was alive, that he's raised from the dead. So Peter, for instance, as we know, was able to face his own crucifixion ultimately. Stephen was prepared to be stoned to death. All the apostles gave their lives. And now some 2,000 years have passed, and in some parts of the world, Christians still suffer imprisonment and worse, even death, for witnessing to the gospel, for standing up for their faith, and for our Lord Jesus Christ. Even in our own society, even in our nation of relative comfort and freedom, we Catholics are thought to be a little strange. And we're encouraged and we're told in not so many ways to keep our faith to ourselves, or to at least keep it just to this 1 hour on Sundays. So, for instance, Catholic parents who have, larger families, more than 2 kids, well, they're looked at with raised eyebrows, aren't they? Catholic nurses and doctors who speak out in defense of all human life can suffer professionally for doing that. And Catholic politicians who are Catholic in more than just name, who actually bring their faith to bear on all the decisions that they make and make that faith known. Usually they can forget about being reelected, right? In other words, there are countless ways that standing up for the faith and for Jesus, witnessing to Jesus, can lead to suffering, can lead to persecution, even today. From speaking up about an injustice at work, to telling the truth about abortion and euthanasia and same-sex marriage, and on and on and on. But in some ways, that's exactly what it means to be a witness to the resurrection, to be a witness to Jesus. It means to be willing to risk persecution, to not let opposition silence us, willing to risk ridicule on sometimes a daily basis as we try to bring our faith to bear on everything that we do, every decision that we make, exposing the lies of the world, being honest and fair and just when others aren't doing that, standing up for the weak and for the defenseless. Those are all ways of witnessing to the resurrection, witnessing to the faith. One of the greatest witnesses is what we're all doing right here this morning, gathering for the Eucharist. What Liam is doing, receiving Holy Communion. It's a tremendous witness to the resurrection of Jesus. Gathering with the community of believers to celebrate Holy Communion. People have died for the right to do what we're doing this morning. Sometimes they still do, all around the world. So coming here each and every week is a way of proclaiming the message of Easter, that Jesus is alive, that he's our Lord. And proclaiming that message by our presence here today helps to reinforce and strengthen the faith of each and every one of us. So some people like Peter and Stephen and the apostles and other early martyrs and the new martyrs today in places like Iran and Syria and communist China, they're called to witness in far more dramatic ways than we Americans usually are. So let's never forget them, first of all. Let's never forget our countless brothers and sisters all around the world whose faith either has to be kept a secret or who risk imprisonment and persecution and sometimes even death itself in order to proclaim and to preach and to live the faith that you and I can so easily take for granted sometimes. Lord, help us to treasure our Catholic faith and the Eucharist and our freedom of religion, and help us to be witnesses for you in our everyday lives in everything that we do.